They may represent the cold cruelty of the British ruling class who are prepared to see suffering and misery. We saw that in the past in the 1980s through starvation when they drove the miners back to work. Nobody will forget as we stood on the picket lines in Yorkshire and elsewhere and saw the misery of the families of miners, the cold cruelty of the British ruling class of Thatcher and the equivalent of Osborne then. And the misery, by the way, caused by the poll tax. But it's more than just the personal whim of George Osborne. It's a product, as the younger comrade who spoke before me indicated, that it arises from the system of capitalism. And not just here in Britain, but of worldwide. Because this is a system that's based upon production, not for social need, but for the profits, which is the unpaid labour of the working class, of a handful of millionaires and of billionaires. And there's a big contradiction at the heart of this system. Historically, capitalism has piled up wealth. It's developed the productive forces of science, of technique, of the organisation of labour. And this, by the way, makes possible, if it's used in a rational manner, for the first time, to abolish want, misery, poverty and privation from the whole of the world. But instead of this, we have unparalleled destruction of wealth in the course of the last 3 years. How many ordinary working people in Britain know? It's not us, the socialists and the Marxists, who are saying this, but the International Monetary Fund have given figures which are astounding on the destruction that has taken place through this system. Fortnum and Mason's lost £80,000 through that occupation on Saturday. Now, we don't approve of some of the methods that were used. I'll comment on that in a moment. But what is that compared to the loss of $50 trillion, the equivalent of the production of all goods and services in 1 year? That's what was lost because of this system in the year of 2008 itself. 2 million workers have been thrown out of their jobs in America. Formerly bustling industrial cities like Detroit, one of the car capitals of the world, is like it's returning to the wilderness. It's going back to a rural existence. In a few years, explorers will go to Detroit and it'll be like those people who went into the Cambodian jungles and found an ancient civilization. That is the consequence of the destruction of capitalism itself. 200 million people worldwide are unemployed at the present time. 70 million of them, like this comrade here today, are young people who have no prospect of a job. You are young, some people are laughing when I 1.5 billion people are in precarious existence, and so on. The so-called recovery has been a recovery in the pockets, really, of the bosses. And the worst effects, of course, is in the neo-colonial world. I haven't got time to mention it, but we're not just members of the Socialist Party, but of the Committee for the Workers International, that has sections in 40 different countries, and we've seen it firsthand in India, in South Africa, in Sri Lanka and in Brazil. Well, I come to the point, this contradiction. Why do we have this waste? Why do we have this colossal environmental destruction that we see in Japan now, where it's even the effects of that catastrophe, which we and others have been warning against, has even reached Glasgow in the course of the last couple of days itself. The system goes ahead when it invests the surplus of the working class back into production. But it arrives at a situation where new goods are produced and the working class cannot buy back the goods that they produce, and therefore the system is jammed, and that is why we have this crisis at this particular moment in time. Miliband, when he spoke on Saturday, he accidentally made a correct point in relation to the government. He actually said, well, this government is actually destroying living standards in general, but this generation and the next generation will not have the living standards of their parents. Now, we have made that point many times. In Britain, we had what we would call the religion of capitalist progress. That today is better than yesterday, and tomorrow will be better than today, and so on. Society will go forward. But we've arrived at one of those periods in history, indicated by the figures I've given, and by what Miliband has said, where now the next generation cannot accept that. Why? Because of the evil character of this government. That's a childish explanation, by the way. Of course they're evil. Of course they're ideologically motivated. Of course they're using the crisis to enhance the position of their class and to attack the working class. But it comes from capitalism. And as Joe pointed out, in relation to the Labour Party, when it's out of power, if you remain within the framework of capitalism, you will be compelled to do the dirty work of the bosses in this system. Why is it in the House of Commons? During the budget debate, you had Osborne jeering at Ed Balls and Cohen saying, well, you're attacking us on the cuts, but your programme was only for 2 billion less cuts than we were proposing, and nobody can deny that, by the way. They want the same cuts, not as deep, at a slower pace, and so on. And therefore, in this demonstration, those points should have been made. I have to say, there were workers at the meeting on Saturday who did applaud Miliband when he spoke. A few people booed, and that indicates hoping against hope. They think that maybe Miliband and New Labour have learned the lessons from the past. Unfortunately, that is not the case. Capitalism is like the dilemma that faced Alexander in Greek mythology when he came to the Gordian knot. He couldn't untie the Gordian knot. It doesn't matter how many times you try. Like Alexander, who took his sword and cut the Gordian knot, it means we have to break the power of capitalism. That's what this reawakening of the working class represents at the present time. Without this, there will be a drawn-out agony. There will be battles like we're having with the POA. There will be battles like we're having now on the question of pensions that Martin mentioned, and that means we have to raise the question of a change in the system. We stand for system change. We're together with everybody who fights the cuts. We'll be out there with the POA tomorrow and whenever, fighting against the attempts of the government to crush them. This is a government, by the way, that claims to stand for democracy in the Middle East. What about the democratic rights of the POA members? What about the fact that this government is proposing to introduce further attacks on the already puerile rights of workers to go on strike in Britain? Well, you have virtually the position where it's illegal to strike in Britain. They use the judges even when we get a majority. You have, in the Middle East, however, at the movement of working class people there, what a marvellous demonstration to all the cynics who said, for instance, Tony Blair and co, in relation to Iraq, when we said we're opposed to an invasion in Iraq, and their argument was, well, how are you going to remove Saddam Hussein? And we said, by a movement of working class people. That's absolutely impossible. He's got all the arms in the world. What did the masses do in Egypt? They used their independent power. Millions who paralysed the army, paralysed the regime. What did the Tunisian masses do? Exactly the same thing when they drove Ben Ali into exile. Now reaction in the form of Saudi Arabia. And also we have to say, in Libya as well, we hold no brief for Gaddafi. But at the same time, we do not support the intervention of imperialism, and shame on those socialists allegedly who've come out with that position.